Our devotion today is from Exodus chapter 23. In this passage, we see God continuing to give the law to the Israelites as they're in the wilderness. Before we look at it, remember today to be in prayer for Joshua and Faith, Mills, and little Paisley. So in Exodus chapter 20, we saw God give them the Ten Commandments, and over the next few chapters, He's continuing to give them these laws, how He expects them to live once they get into the promised land. If they want to experience His blessing and everything that He has for them, He's giving them these laws so they will know what's expected of them. Although as I read through this today, I think, there's just so much more here for us than just a list of things that are expected of us by God. I mean, of course, there's good things here, things that we should see in our life. And yet, one of the things we see also when we read through these laws and these lists of laws is it teaches us about who God is. It teaches us about His characteristics, about what makes Him happy and the things that please Him. We talked about that before when we looked at the Ten Commandments. It taught us about God's holiness, right? That He wasn't going to dwell with sin, that He wasn't going to have any other gods before Him. And it reflected that incident they had at the mountain where they realized how separate they were from God and how He was holy and they were afraid that they were going to die. We learn about who God is through His law. And I think that we can learn several things about who God is, about the fact that He cares about the poor, the downtrodden. We see some laws here about that. He cares about honesty and integrity and justice. We see laws about that here. He cares about the Sabbath and their remembrance of Him and what He's done for them, and that they keep these memorials and that they're holy when they go into the promised land, and that they're not led astray by the other nations and the people that live there. I think for me, there's a couple of verses at the very beginning of this that stand out that teach us something about who God is. And strangely enough, they're the verses that are talking about donkeys, okay? Let's see here. In verse 4 it says, "If you meet your enemy's ox or his donkey going astray, you shall surely bring it back to him again. If you see the donkey of one who hates you lying under its burden, and you would refrain from helping it, you shall surely help him with it." I don't know. I think those verses just stood out to me today because it teaches us not just what God expects us, but His heart towards enemies. Of course, we think about enemies in our lives, and I'm sure we can all think about someone who doesn't like us, who has done wrong to us, who we may consider to even hate us. And in our flesh, when we look at those people, it may be even just a simple situation of something where we could help them, but you know what? Do they really deserve it? I mean, what have they done for us? How do they feel about us? And yet, here we have God saying, I know what your heart would want to do. You would want to ignore it because they're not your friend. You don't want to do good to them. You don't feel like they deserve it. And yet, God telling us at the same time, I expect you to not do what your flesh is telling you to do, but to do what I want you to do. And I think that teaches us, obviously, something about God, because that's God's heart towards His enemies, towards us. We know we didn't deserve God's goodness and mercy in our life, and yet He was willing to love us in spite of that. And so I think that when I read that passage today, even just this simple verse about, helping your enemy's donkey if you see it and it's in trouble, it reminds me about the goodness of God today. That God cares about His enemies, and God expects us to care about our enemies, those who hate us. I am thankful for this passage today. If God spoke something to you specifically out of this passage, I'd ask you, leave us a message on Facebook, on YouTube. What did God say to you? Let's remember to minister to one another. God bless you guys.